When we think about power, our minds naturally go straight to the battlefield. We imagine crossing borders, deploying standing armies, and possessing the capacity to level entire cities. For centuries, empires and modern governments alike have poured staggering resources into these physical arsenals. It is how they project strength and how they enforce their perimeters. But some of the most consequential events in human history weren't shaped by warships or missiles. They were driven by forces that leave no visible ruins, forces that slip quietly past the most heavily guarded borders on Earth, landing completely undetected. To understand how this works, we have to look at how we process information. When the world around us feels unpredictable, our brains don't look for more facts, they look for patterns. We seek out familiar voices and stories that make a complicated reality easier to understand. These cognitive shortcuts helped our ancestors survive. They are the mechanisms that allow societies to function and trust to build. But because we are wired to value these simple stories, we create a point of entry. When an external narrative slots perfectly into these emotional needs, the influence is often impossible to detect. Because people inherently trust their own feelings of anger, pride, or hope, they rarely suspect that those emotions have been engineered. They are facing a force that leaves no physical ruins because its target isn't the territory, it's the person. The objective of shaping public perception goes back thousands of years. Long before mass media existed, early rulers recognized that physical force was expensive and difficult to maintain. They knew that true control required capturing the narrative. Kings and emperors commissioned these massive, idealized portraits for a highly specific reason. By projecting a divine, towering presence, they reinforced their own legitimacy to the citizens walking below them. Fast forward to the modern era, and the technology has evolved, but the playbook remains remarkably consistent. Step 1 is always the same: identify a threat and emphasize it relentlessly. Fear is the sharpest tool available because it commands your immediate attention. It demands a response. When a population is frightened, the discomfort of sitting still and analyzing a situation quickly becomes unbearable. You see this formula repeat during nearly every major crisis. An authority figure points to a looming danger, dominates the public discussion with warnings about that danger, and then steps forward as the only entity capable of providing a solution. The results are highly predictable. Urgency overrides careful analysis. Frightened populations abandon their skepticism and eagerly support extraordinary, unchecked measures they would normally reject outright. The frightened mind actively seeks out a shield. By offering that shield, the propagandist gains total influence through a transaction the public actually begs for. Once the fear is established, step 2 requires building the myth. Complex, nuanced political realities are stripped down and rebuilt into a stark binary: patriots against enemies, heroes against villains. The goal is strict emotional engagement, forging a massive collective identity. Once an entire population ties their personal pride to a specific narrative, facts become secondary. Questioning the story begins to feel like betraying your own community. Step 3 ensures the myth survives. It relies on a simple quirk of human psychology. If we hear the same message relentlessly, it begins to feel comfortable. It begins to feel true. As communication technologies advanced, the speed and scale at which these stories could be repeated exploded. The industrial printing press allowed perfectly uniform narratives to reach thousands of people simultaneously. Mass-produced daily newspapers took those crafted myths and handed them out on every major street corner, weaving them directly into the daily routines of the public. Radio deepened the emotional impact. Authoritative voices could bypass the front door entirely, speaking straight into the living rooms where families sat gathered together. Television paired those voices with highly curated imagery. And today, the internet has stripped away every remaining barrier, creating a global landscape of instant, inescapable immersion. The delivery mechanisms operate at speeds ancient empires couldn't possibly imagine, but the underlying objective hasn't changed at all: flood the human mind with a perfectly repeated story until all alternative viewpoints simply cease to exist. It is incredibly easy to look back at history and assume propaganda is always obvious. We picture authoritarian dictators shouting from podiums or bold political posters plastered on brick walls. But the absolute highest tier of propaganda is completely invisible. It aligns so flawlessly with your pre-existing assumptions that you walk away fully convinced you arrived at the conclusion entirely on your own. This works because institutions seeking influence understand one simple reality. Human beings do not act on raw objective facts. We act entirely on what we believe. Shape perception and you guide the decision. Guide individuals and you quietly direct millions of people at once. Dominating history rarely requires conquering physical territory or hoarding natural resources. The true seat of power has always been found in the ability to hold human perception in the palm of your hand. Recognizing that this influence exists is the only real defense we have. The historical push to shape public opinion is evolving into a more ambitious objective: the development of systems that regulate every thought, word, and action of an entire population.